Hey, we have Polina Pompliano today here. She is the founder of The Profile, which is a new media company that features long-form profiles of successful people and companies. She sends it out each week, one of my favorite newsletters. And previously, she spent 5 years writing for Fortune. But today, we're here to talk about something really exciting. She's just released a new book called Hidden Genius: The Secret Ways of Thinking That Power the World's Most Successful People. So I'm looking forward to diving in. I've read this book and it's really a fun read. I think what I want to try today, Paulina, if you're up for it, is I want to throw out some quotes that I thought were super interesting. I'd love to hear kind of from you, like what you think they mean and some stories behind each of those quotes.
I'm so excited. Yes.
All right. The first one is about being an original creator. Original creators typically have three things in common. They have a unique point of view on the world. They are confident they can achieve an ambitious goal. And finally, they are willing to fail spectacularly in the name of creating something revolutionary.
Yeah, I love that because I think about it a lot in terms of creators and people who think they're creating original work, but it's actually not that original if you really think about it. Mm-hmm. One of the people that I talk about in this chapter is Ed Catmull, who's the co-founder of Pixar. Pixar is known to be kind of revolutionary in the world of film and you know, some of the ones you might recognize are Toy Story, Finding Nemo, Ratatouille, Up, those kinds of things. And Ed is really, really interesting because the way he thinks is so counterintuitive to, you know, a lot of the people that I've studied. But he says that, yes, you have to have a unique point of view on the world. So when we're gonna, he calls it aim to fail the elevator test. So, you know, usually when you graduate from college, they tell you like, have your elevator pitch. So when you get in an elevator, you can explain your idea for a business or a creation of some sort in 30 seconds or less. And Ed's whole theory is like, if you can do that, that means your idea is already derivative of something that's happened before. Because how are you going to explain Ratatouille, a rat that can cook, in 30 seconds or less? People are gonna be like, this is crazy. This would never work. Or Toy Story, these like toys that can talk. And he's like, that movie, if you explain it in 30 seconds or less, people will be like, that has really the potential to fail because it could be really commercial and really consumerist. Like think about all the, you know, it's just, it doesn't make sense. So he loves the "it doesn't make sense" line, and that's what he gravitates toward.
And why does he gravitate towards that?
Because he knows that the ones that don't make sense have the potential to be the really breakthrough films. So he's very ambitious, but his grand ideas are often ones that sound contradictory. And then the final part of that, have a unique point of view, have an ambitious goal, and, you know, like be ready to fail in a spectacular way. Is that the Pixar process? A lot of people only see the final product, but the process is very, very, it's rife with failure and experimentation. And Ed talks about how it's a lot of smart people in one room, but their one task is, I want you to come with good ideas, bad ideas, things that you think will fail. I want us to fail in the making of this film. And he says that there's a lot of argument and a lot of debate, but it never gets personal because they're attacking the idea, not the people. He has a quote that I included in the book that he says, it's not even a failure. It's just experimentation. He says it's like, it's only a failure if you don't learn from it. If you learn from it, it's actually just iteration.
And I think that they're known for, what I've read about them, they're known for just like rapid iteration. They'll start with storyboards and then storyboard it again, show it to a group, storyboard it again, throw things out. And it sounds like it's a relentlessly like iterative process to get to their final product. And I think one of the things they say, like the film is never done, it's just shipped. Like at some point in time, we put it out the door. But it's like, it could always do like one more iteration. And I feel like myself and probably many entrepreneurs that are watching can kind of like empathize with that.
But it's just really helpful to have even one other person where you yourself don't get hung up on this one thing failed that I tried and oh no, but like just knowing like we're just going to tweak it until there's like a final product that we can, that's palatable, even if we still think it's shit We're just going to put it out there. And I think that's one reason I've been successful with the profile, my newsletter, is because I don't have a high threshold for perfection. I'm just like, you know what? It's good enough. Let's try it. And then people give me feedback and then I'll iterate.
Stress test yourself through regular hardship. This was one of my favorite chapters, kind of like diving into to this segment. So I'm curious what this idea of like introducing hardship into your own life is all about.
It's really funny. When I was writing the book, I never thought like, I was always wondering, like, I wonder which chapter people will most gravitate toward. But so far, I have found that most people really like the mental toughness chapter, which is chapter 2. Because normally when we talk about mental resilience, it's like this mushy, malleable topic. And people often talk about it in cliches. But I tried my hardest to make it practical with like super specific techniques that people could actually do. In this chapter, I talk about David Goggins, who's this, Navy SEAL turned ultra athlete. And he talks about how you need to callous the mind, meaning that you need to introduce voluntary hardship into your life in order to be prepared for the moments when there's involuntary hardship in your life. So in our lives, we'll probably, have to deal with the death of a family member or lose our job or something unexpected will happen that will crush us mentally. But if you had up along this way introduced voluntary hardship, you have the mental skills to deal with it better and the coping skills than if all of a sudden this happened and you had never done anything stressful in your life. Goggins talks about several techniques, some of them physical, but the one that I really stuck with me is like this idea of stress testing yourself. So let's say that, you don't want to clean your house and your first instinct is like, oh, I don't feel like it. I'm exhausted. I'm blah, blah, blah. Your mind starts coming up with excuses. He's like, clean it anyway. That earns you trust that you can do hard things that you don't necessarily want to do. If you don't want to go, if you're training for, let's say, a marathon, but today you don't feel like going on a run, he's like, get up at 6 a.m. and do it anyway. And again, like once you're doing it, you're not like, oh, I so regret that I did this, but it's just like these small moments of voluntary hardship that frame your life as more of an adventure that has obstacles and challenges that you can overcome versus this like maze where something scary might pop up and you don't know if you're mentally resilient enough to overcome it.
Yeah, and that's kind of different than actually self-talk was an interesting like portion of this chapter, but that's kind of different than just saying like, I'm going to think positive thoughts and that's how I'll overcome like stressful situations. It's actually putting yourself in those situations and knowing that you're resilient enough to handle that sort of stress.
Yes. And actually, I want to talk about just briefly about this idea of like self-talk. I do think that's important, but one technique that Goggins does that I think is really useful, even though most people will probably their first reaction to it will be like, ooh, that's harsh, is he says, whenever you want to start changing yourself or changing your identity, if you're not happy with the person you are today and you want to be somebody different, he's like, what you should do is create an accountability mirror. And how he did that for himself is he was overweight. He had a job he didn't like. He often lied to people for validation. So he went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and he said, like, looked at himself and he said all the really honest things about himself that maybe his friends and family wouldn't tell him. So he said, you're overweight, you're lazy, and you lie all the time. How are you going to change that? So he started pasting like little sticky notes all around the mirror that said tiny challenges that he would have to do that day, like run 2 miles today, or tell somebody the truth when they ask you to do something and you want to lie, but actually tell them the truth, or like tiny moments that tweak your habits in small ways until they compound and become big and change your identity. And so I think like, yes, positive visualization and self-talk is important, but I think starting with the really harsh reality of who you are and what you don't like about yourself and you want to change, start there and then can you take small steps to become your aspirational self?
First of all, that honesty with yourself is often hard to come by, because sometimes we give ourselves like the biggest pass, right? We say like, oh, all those people out there, whatever. But for me, the excuses are A, B, and C, right? The honesty is the first part of that. And the second part of it is like, what are you going to do about it? And I find that to be like, that combo is like pretty powerful, because you could just get in that downward spiral of like, I'm fat, I'm lazy, and I lie. I'm a liar. Or you could say, this is where my current state is, and what am I going to do about it? And I love his story and what he did about it. Competence breeds confidence. And I think that is almost like a continuation of what Goggins is trying to do.
Exactly. Competence breeds confidence is all about giving yourself optionality in the future, is the way I think about it. So I tell the story of astronaut Chris Hadfield. He has been in some really stressful situations, including one time he went temporarily blind when this like mixture of soap and oil got stuck in his eye. And because there's no gravity, he was outside of the International Space Station on a spacewalk, and he was holding on with one hand, and he like goes temporarily blind. He can't reach inside.
This is like a bad time to go blind, I would say.
Very bad time, like probably the worst.
Out of all the times, this is like a bad time to go blind.
Yeah, like my worst fear, just floating away into space.
Totally.
So like he couldn't reach inside his helmet to rub his eye because they have these big helmets. So his mind immediately, instead of panicking, it started giving him options. It was like, you could call Houston and call for help. You could get your fellow astronaut to do like an incapacitated crew rescue, or you could like cry a little bit, let it dilute the stuff in your eye. He ended up doing a fourth option, which is like he opened the vent on the side of his helmet, let some like oxygen out, and that evaporated, etc. He did it. It worked, and then he continued working. Most people would completely buckle. I mean, if it was me, I'd be like, Houston, we got a real big problem right now. So then he's had a bunch of these like incidents over the years. One time he disposed of a live snake while piloting a plane. Like, that's insane to me.
A literal snakes on a plane situation.
Literal snakes on a plane.
Yeah.
So when he talks about fear, he says that like fear is normal. It's an instinct, right? But you only develop, or he says the best antidote to fear is competence. So if you can rely on your own self, that you have the skills to get out of this situation and figure out options, then that's what makes you confident in your abilities. And he uses this example of a bike. When we're all little kids, we see a bike for the first time. We're like, that is really dangerous. I could fall. I could break my leg. I could hit my head. The danger is there. But as you become more competent and better at riding the bike, it becomes silly to be afraid of how dangerous this bike is. Yet the bike itself never changed. It's still just as dangerous as it always was. You're the one who changed. So that's like why competence breeds confidence.
Trust equals consistency plus time.
So for everybody listening right now, I want you to ask yourself, is there any area in my life where I trust someone who consistently breaks their promises to me? It could be a partner in a relationship. It could be a friend. It could be a business partner or a boss or a coworker. But the answer is probably no. You do not trust people who constantly say they're going to do something and then break their promises, including you to yourself, right? But it's really interesting because I found it that I'm much more attracted to people in life who say they're going to do something and not only keep their promises, but keep their promises over a long period of time. It's one thing to be like, yeah, Kyle, let's do this interview. And then I keep canceling it or rescheduling it. And you're like, this is an unreliable, unserious person. Unserious, right. Is that a word? Maybe. I don't know.
Sure.
But
we'll go with it.
Exactly. So consistency plus time equals trust is something I heard Reid Hoffman say on a podcast once. And I thought about it and I was like, that's really interesting because I know you're the same way. Like when I send my newsletter, I know that if I'm not consistent with the day and time that I send it, if new people have just signed up, they'll be like, first of all, they won't get the newsletter. And then the next time they get it, they'll be like, what did I even sign up for? Like, I don't even remember. So
Yeah.
it's like, you have to show up consistently in order to earn people's trust. It's not just given, you have to earn it. And then over time, only then can you ask them to back you financially with their dollars, because they're certain that you're not just going to take the money, leave, and never send the newsletter again. So I apply that formula to every single area in my life.
Yeah, and that trust is compounding over time, right?
Yes.
It's not just cumulative, it's really exponential. Once you continue with that formula, you kind of start to see in your relationships a lot of good stuff can happen, and obviously it can go the other way as well.
I think Charlie Munger says that like the highest level of humanity that humanity can achieve is mutual deserved trust. And he's like, that's how the Mayo Clinic operates, on mutual deserved trust. And I think he jokes, he's like, so, if your marriage agreement is 47 pages long, I suggest you not enter, because this is the person you're supposed to trust for the rest of your life. But if you start off with this contract that long, maybe you're in for a treat.
Great stories happen to those who can tell them. This chapter on storytelling I thought was really fun as well. It's a skill. Like what I continue to learn over time is like this. The ability to tell a story is a learned skill, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on great stories happen to those who can tell them.
Like, great stories happen to everybody, right? But Ira Glass jokes that good stories happen to those who can tell them, because it is a skill. Like, we all know people who have this insane, incredible thing happen to them, and then they completely butcher the story when they tell it. So so often if I'm with a person like that, I'm like, hold on, let me tell this part. You got to build
I'm
suspense.
also that person. I'm like, wait,
really?
I
know you want to tell, but let me, because some people reveal too much too early. They don't wait. They don't build the suspense. It's like, you got to know what you're doing. Yeah. So I talked about some really good storytellers in this chapter, including Aaron Sorkin, who is the director and writer of The Social Network, and and
West
a lot
Wing
of other,
too, I think.
West Wing, The Trials of the Chicago 7, A Few Good Men. He's behind a lot, but The Social Network is particularly interesting. I watched this video where it's like basically a master class on storytelling, as told by Aaron Sorkin. And he talks about how he's like, when I wrote The Social Network, I'm not particularly interested in technology industry or founders or entrepreneurs. Like, that's not really my forte. But what I was interested in was that there were so many lawsuits that there were a lot of conflicting truths at the same time. And he's like, that's what I was interested in. And he does it, if you watch his films and TV shows, you'll notice that there is not one ultimate source of truth. He always braids in different perspectives and makes you as the viewer think. And he trusts that the viewer is intelligent to, come to their own conclusions. But his formula for storytelling is basically like, you don't have a story unless you can use the words but, except, or, and then in the telling of your story. He says the key ingredient to a great story is conflict laced with intent. So it's like, yes, there's conflict, but what is the protagonist's intent behind that conflict? And he's like, for example, in The Social Network, there were so many, Mark Zuckerberg was feuding with so many people. There was his girlfriend at the time, then Eduardo, then the Winklevoss twins, then all of the institution of Harvard. And he's like, okay, that's the conflict. What is the intent? His intent is to gain social status, because he doesn't have it. People think he's a nerd. He's not cool. He wants social status. He didn't get invited to that fancy club party, whatever. So he's like, I will plow through anything to get to social status. And that's the point. It's like his stories are just, there's so many different sides and so many things to think about. And he says, basically, as a storyteller, ask yourself, what does the character want? And what is he willing to do to get that? And he's like, it's great for him to want it, but it's even better if he needs it.
And that's interesting for Zuckerberg. It wasn't like wealth or it wasn't solving an interesting engineering problem. It was what the real core driver was prestige, is notoriety. In this chapter, you also talked a little bit about this idea of there are no ordinary people. Mm-hmm. And your kind of journey. I guess I'm curious, as somebody that does a little bit of journalism myself, like what is the key to pulling out a good story of a seemingly ordinary subject?
You would think as like reporters, you have the opportunity to interview these larger than life figures with these incredible stories and what they've built. Yet I always find that my favorite interviews are not with those people. Mm-hmm. It's always the regular, ordinary people who you would think like don't have that much interesting things to share, which is, by the way, the reason Humans of New York is so popular is because they are the extraordinary stories of ordinary people. Mm-hmm. So I learned this lesson when I was in college, and we had, in my like intro to journalism class, we had an assignment to write a profile of like a classmate. So I was like, no brainer. I've been doing journalism for a few years.
Mm-hmm. I'm a pro. I'm a junior in college, you know? Yeah.
Like I was already working at the student newspaper. So this was a class. I was like, I can knock this out. Sure. And then I realized that with the student newspaper, I was covering the administration, which is like the deans, the president, people who are media trained. They know how to give you a good quote. When I had to interview my classmate, though, I was just sitting there like expecting them to tell me about this grand life full of challenges and intrigue and conflict, and they didn't, because they were just answering my questions. And then I did the interview and I was like, I don't know. I don't know what I have here. I can find somebody more interesting. So I went to my professor and I told him, I was like, can I just like switch the person? It's still really early on. Can I just switch my subject for the profile? And he realized what was happening and he was like, I'm going to take this opportunity to teach you a lesson. And he said, basically, no one is inherently boring. They're only boring because you haven't asked the right questions yet. And it's like, he made it sound like, which is true, that it was my fault. Like I wasn't doing my job as an interviewer, that this story wasn't compelling. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. He's like, every person has some gem, something that they've done that's really interesting. You just have to discover it. And if you zoom out, I haven't talked about this before, but if you zoom out, like hidden genius and the whole idea that each of us has genius, we just haven't discovered it, stems from this idea that like extraordinary stories are found in ordinary people. I did the story. It turned out well, but it required a lot of digging and a lot of asking follow-up questions and listening to the things that this is another storytelling thing, the things that they emphasize, but also the things that they downplayed, right? Like a lot of times when you interview someone, if you're not actively paying attention, you'll miss the things that they're like really proud to talk about and the things that they're like, let's just move on quickly.
And sometimes even the things that aren't said.
Exactly. Yes. Like Hans Zimmer, he talks about like listening to the subtext. When I'm talking right now and you're listening to me, you see that I use a lot of like hand motions and whatever. And when I get really excited, maybe my hand motions get really crazy. But it's just like the subtext of the conversation is very important. And ordinary people, in my opinion, have the most amazing stories.
Focus on perfecting systems instead of outcomes, and the outcomes take care of themselves.
A lot of like chess players know this. A lot of people who think in systems are very aware that when you make a mistake, you have to evaluate the process and the fundamentals of the game instead of just focusing on the one singular mistake. So I think most people, when they look at, let's say, their career and they made a mistake, they're like, why did I go wrong here? And they're just evaluating that single mistake instead of
that one action, right?
That one action, like what misstep like did I do to create this? Instead of looking at the whole picture and thinking in a systems-based way, which is what were the processes and systems that led me to this mistake, and how can I eliminate all future mistakes like this one, so that I never repeat them again. You'll find people in your life who make the same mistake over and over, and there's a pattern to their mistakes. Systems based thinkers think about like, what are the systems I can put in place to prevent myself from doing this again? And the best organizations do this. The most efficient CEOs do this. But I always think about this quote by Nick Saban, who's the coach of Alabama's like college football team. He says, "Don't look at the score, play the next play." It's all about, if you can deconstruct the whole game into single plays, you can see a whole system of actions that you can tweak next time. To make it practical, it's to start with the goal and then figure out the systems, instead of trying to be like, what can I do right now? And I'm getting lost in the process. But I know that my goal is to one day write a book. It's like, no, if your goal is to write a book, you need to sit down, come up with an idea, like get so granular in your process that okay, this is where I could make a misstep, or this is where I could tweak this. And by getting super specific, James Clear talks about this with habits, breaking it down into chunks, you will get there because you have every step of the way figured out, instead of just like swimming in the unknown of like, maybe one day I will write one chapter, and then it's just like, have it figured out. If you know what your goal is, you can deconstruct it into much smaller.
I'm a huge James Clear fan, and read Atomic Habits every January. So it's like one of my 5 books I read every January. One of the things I think is he talks about that's really interesting is the difference between a goal and a system. Is that a goal, like a goal can be achieved or not achieved, right? So you want to run a half marathon, right? You train, people that are motivated by this idea of goal driven, you train, you run the half marathon, great, you finish. You find yourself a month later, maybe running once a month, as opposed to like a consistent runner. If your goal is, I would like to be a healthy, consistent runner, then your thinking and the way you're setting up your processes and your systems are much different. And that also ties into this idea that you touch on too, around like behavior change is identity focused. So you start asking yourselves like, what system and what micro actions are being put in place in order to be this type of person, in this case, a runner? What would a runner do?
Instead of just achieving your goal, is like, you need to embody the identity of the type of person that achieves that goal.
And that's been super, super powerful in my life and in my company to be focusing way more. It is, especially like kind of as an early stage entrepreneur, you're just like, I want to get the thing done, whatever the thing is, ship the product, serve the client, whatever it is. And the real kind of like shift in my mindset over the last, we'll say 5 years, has just been like, oh, the fun part is actually like, how about the system that's creating all of this good stuff? Like, what if we could spend more time just thinking about that and working on that? And for me, it's been a more fun way to run a business than just like, how do I knock this next project out of the park or whatever.
That's really cool, because then over time, don't you kind of look back and see like, oh, wow, I have become this aspirational self that I wanted to be when I wanted to achieve that one goal.
Yeah. And it becomes more fluid and automatic, maybe. It's not it is just a way of being like this. Well, this is just kind of like what we do. And so that's like, it's a much different feel to it, I feel like.
I should also read Atomic Habits every January. That's not a bad idea.
My other key book every January is Essentialism. So I do those two. I do Brene Brown's Rising Strong, and actually Naval, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant is my other one.
Great.
Who was mentioned
now
in this
book too. Now you can add hidden genius to it, Kyle.
Now I can add hidden genius every year to remind me of all this genius. Oh, I loved this quote. A soldier mindset is about victory at all costs. A scout mindset is better. It's about accuracy at all costs. Talk to me about the difference between a soldier and a scout. And is it possible to move from one to the other?
This is Julia Galef's idea. She runs a Center for Applied Rationality. And she talks about this idea of like there's a scout mindset and a soldier mindset. When you're in a soldier mindset, think about what a soldier does. They protect, they defend, but ultimately their goal is to win. No matter what, at all costs, you just want to win, regardless of whether you got to kill, you got to do whatever you got to do.
Right.
And then a scout, on the other hand, is much more about like, I'm going to go out on the battlefield. I'm going to survey the terrain. I'm going to gather information. I'm going to collect all the facts. And then, logically and rationally, probably without emotion, I'm going to create as much of an accurate map of this terrain as possible. And very, very few people are scouts. Most of us are soldiers when we think and when we believe something. If I'm trying to convince you of something, I'm going to defend it to the death. Like I will try to bring every fact, even if it's out of context. I'm going to leave out nuance because that doesn't help my case and things like that. I might even burn a bridge with you to get my point across because I want to win this argument. But she says when we start thinking like a scout, we start celebrating being objective and not right. So if you're arguing with someone and if the goal is to win, you're not going to be objective. You're going to be biased. You're going to throw out things that maybe you don't really want to say, things like that. Being objective, if that's the goal, which I personally think it would incredibly improve all of your relationships if you tried this. But if the goal is to be objective and to find the, to get as close to the truth as possible, then you and your counterpart shouldn't be attacking each other personally. You should be attacking this idea. And she actually recommends visualizing the idea or the belief as separate from you so that you don't take things personally when your ideas are attacked. And I do think that you can move from a soldier mindset to more of a scout mindset.
It feels to me like it is a very natural thing for humans it's almost like we're born soldiers. I don't know if that's like the right metaphor, but it is very common and the easiest thing to pick a tribe, defend a tribe's way of being, or pick an identity, defend an identity's way of being to the hilt. And that seems like the thing that you don't need to like learn how to do, right? That's the thing that we do automatically. But you're saying you think there is an ability to change that.
It's difficult, but I do think that like the reason that we are born soldiers, like you said, is because humans have been doing this since the beginning of time. James Clear actually says the reason it's so hard to get somebody to change their beliefs is because what you're actually asking them to do is to change their tribe. And like, you already have your friends, you have your family, you have your beliefs. Why would you ever be like, you know what? I actually think that the opposite political candidate is making some really good points lately. And then people would be like, oh, okay, you've changed. Yeah. And people don't like change. Yeah. So I think that that's why it's so difficult. But if you become a little bit more objective, and I think for me, I don't know that I'm objective, but the thing that's helped me not be so soldier-like is a variety and a diversity in perspectives and experiences. So we moved to the US from Bulgaria when I was 8, but we moved to the South. We moved to Atlanta, Georgia.
Sure.
Then from Georgia, as like an adult after college, I moved to New York. I've always felt like an outsider, kind of like a scout, because I was never an obvious in for the in group.
Yeah.
Like when we moved from Bulgaria and I went to the University of Georgia, like I had friends, but I was always like, I'm not that Southern. You know what I mean? Like I'm an immigrant. When I go back to Bulgaria, you would think that like that's where I would feel most at home. But actually now like I'm too American, right? Like I see things from this perspective. So
you're a Southerner in New York too. I find that dynamic is like a little bit, there are a lot of preconceived notions about the South that are like, I feel fairly closed-minded in the city, and so it is kind of being the outsider is a helpful if you're trying to be a scout, I suppose.
Exactly. And and it's very hard for people to put me in a box because when I was in New York, they're like, ooh, you're from the South. I kind of get it. And then like, oh, wait, but you were born in Bulgaria. Oh, no. And then they're just like confused. They don't know where I fall politically. They don't know where I think whatever. Yeah. And I love that because I think that if more people saw themselves as multidimensional and not just part of this one tribe of soldiers, like we would have much more nuanced conversations.
I think about that like in the public sphere, the political sphere for sure. I also, you talked about when I was reading this chapter, that's what I was thinking about, this like political dialogue that and the fact that polarization is probably destroying democracy at some level, or making it really challenging for democracy to work well, maybe is the best way to say it. But your point was this could actually, any type of relationship, this is really important. I think about this like at work or with your partner, that if the goal isn't for me to be right, but the goal is for us to get to the right place, those are very different dynamics. I find, and I don't know if you found this, that there's less, if that is truly felt by the other party, whoever the other parties are, there's less like digging in. Everybody stops digging in their heels a little bit.
Of all people, from Taylor Swift.
There we go. Hey.
And she said that like her married friends, she was asking about their relationship, and she said that she heard a really interesting perspective in which they said that when they argue, they try to argue like, they're not nasty with each other, and they don't only focus on winning. Because she was like, they said they don't hand out trophies for winning an argument, they hand out divorce papers. So it's like, what is the ultimate goal? So if your ultimate goal is like, let's be objective, we're on the same team and figure this out, then it's a much different conversation.
Hey, and I will take any T Swift quotes. I'm a big fan.
I am too.
Okay, I'm curious. I'd love to learn more about this. Audience is not the same thing as community.
Author Chris Brogan said that the difference between audience and community is which way the chairs are facing. So if the chairs are facing to me and I am the speaker to the people, then that you have an audience. Twitter is an audience. Anything that's a one channel communication is an audience. If you have a community, then it's a circle. It's made up of me and also all the people in my community talking to each other kind of as equals, not me spewing information at them and them just listening. It's they're able to talk too, they're able to give me feedback, things like that. And I've tried really, really hard with the profile to not just make it a one channel communication, because it is easy to do that, right? Like you can send your newsletter to thousands of people and you kind of never hear from them and you just go about your life.
You see open rates, you see click-throughs, but you don't see people.
All these influencers you see on Instagram that are talking about like all my followers and my community. Like, no, that's just an audience. Like these are numbers to you unless you actively engage with them. And that's why I've like created a Telegram group, or I answer every single email from readers, or we created like in-person events in different cities so people could meet. So it's basically like constant intermingling. And you create, by doing that, you also create moments of serendipity for the community. You never know like who you might meet for whatever reason, but they're part of this community, exactly like real life or exactly like real communities. You can create community, but you have to create all the elements that are present with a tight-knit group.
Your mind is defined by its upper limit, the best content that it habitually consumes and is capable of consuming.
I really like this one.
Well, that's so shocking from somebody that reads a ton of content that you'd really like this. I'm blown away. I'm surprised.
So he's a New York Times columnist, David Brooks. During the pandemic, he wrote a commencement speech since he couldn't deliver it in person. And he called it something like a commencement speech too honest to deliver in person, or something like that. And in it, he talks about how as you get out of school and you graduate and you move on into your career and life, your upper limit of the amount of like genius that your brain is capable of consuming drops. So he's trying to say that when you're in school, you're forced to contend with like difficult ideas. You have to read really hard material. You have to write essays taking a position that you may not necessarily agree with.
Mhm.
You have to like figure that out in your mind. How am I going to debate this? So you're forced to put really like interesting and difficult ideas into your brain. But then as you get out of college and you don't have to do that anymore and you're working in your specialty, you stop doing that and you start consuming maybe more like junk food content that's easier to comprehend, the really clickbaity articles that are easy to read. And so when you stop, he says that when you stop surrounding yourself with genius, instead of your brain becoming bigger and broader, instead, it like dumbs it down when you surround yourself with run-of-the-mill stuff, is the way he puts it. So I always think about this idea of like elevating your content diet. Conduct an audit of what you consume on a daily basis in terms of content and see if that is, if it's raising your maximum taste or lowering your bar for your maximum taste. But for example, I talk about like, what do you read? What do you listen to? What do you watch?
Mhm.
But also, who do you hang out with?
Yeah.
Because I think that our tribes and the people we surround ourselves with tell us a lot about how we think and what we think. And if you're not, for example, if you're a really ambitious person, you have these like grand goals, are you still hanging out with your buddies from, high school that maybe aren't as ambitious as your college, whatever phase in your life you're in? Are you surrounding yourself with the people that you want to become? Or are you just kind of keeping friends just because you've been friends forever?
Yeah, I've heard the quote that you are the sum of the 5 people you hang out with most often, and it's I've found it to be true in my life over a bunch of different phases. That's why like marrying a really awesome person is important too.
Yeah, somebody who can like evolve and change with you, because if you're gonna have to reinvent yourself over the course of your life, and if they can't reinvent too, then you have like one person who's growing and one person who's staying stagnant.
As far as like elevating content diet, do you think like the profile should be on that reading list?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and part of the reason I actually started the profile is because in 2017, media had one of its, regular cycles. People were getting laid off. People were a lot of, I don't know if you remember this, you probably do, but it was like there were a lot of one media organization would do an investigation, let's say into Uber.
Mm-hmm.
And then all these other media publications just took it and like wrote 200 words, like kind of rewrote the article, even though they themselves never confirmed the anonymous sources, the whatever. They never checked. And then it was all this stuff. It was I don't know. I was just like really down on journalism.
Yeah.
And I was like, the profile, I was like, I know there's really good long form journalism out there, but I was specifically interested in people. And I was like, if I can just curate these articles and send them to family and friends, we can talk about stuff, elevate our content diets. And we talk about things that are interesting to us, and like maybe the conversation takes us somewhere else. But that was part of me like elevating my content diet.
If I remember correctly, you were writing this before you left Fortune. You did maybe a year, a little bit less than a year or something like that.
Oh, I did 3 years.
3 years. Okay, gotcha. And was that, out of curiosity, did you like do that for 3 years as a side gig because you're like, is this something viable for me to like take a leap to?
Oh, never. No. I honestly just did it because I needed to do something for myself that gave me life, and I was excited about. Yeah. So I would work on it like at night and on the subway. And I never thought it would become a business. I never thought it would make money. Never thought I would leave my job at Fortune for it.
So what made you take the leap then?
So when I started the profile, Substack didn't exist.
Right.
They actually emailed me like once they launched, and I was like, I'm not moving email provider again.
Yeah.
Because the struggle. It's awful.
I've done 2 moves and I've hated all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, Substack's great. But before Substack, I had done 3.
Yep.
And each one was awful in its own way. And like emails weren't delivering, and it was just really bad.
There's always that fear of like you move off this platform for some reason that you go to like
yes,
0 opens. You're like, what is
everything
yeah,
breaks again.
yeah.
It doesn't get delivered. And I was like, this is a new platform. I don't know. But that didn't exist. But then by 2020, I remember thinking like, I wonder if people would actually, do they find this content interesting enough to where they would be, to where they would back it with their dollars. Like I was just really curious. But also I was thinking of like, there's so much I wanted to do with the profile. Like I want to do interviews and I wanted to write original content, but you can't do that while you're still working on another media publication.
Sure.
That's when I kind of started thinking about it. And I tested the premium layer in January of 2020 and I left in March. So I kind of like had a period where I tested it.
Well, I think maybe you were one of my first Substack subscriptions, if not top, like first 5, and been a long time reader. What were you most surprised by as you were kind of like going through the research for this book? My thinking is that like this is a lot of organization of the work that you've done with the profile. And maybe the answer is there's nothing new and interesting like by like pulling all this stuff together. But maybe there were some like interesting connections that you wouldn't have seen if you didn't pull this into a book.
There was one big thing that I learned through this. And like you, if some of you listening have been reading the profile for a long time, you'll recognize a lot of the stories because it was kind of a large organization project. And I had studied so many different types of people. I was like, how do they fit together? And you'll notice in a lot of the chapters, there are people who you may not necessarily think make sense together. But I was like, oh my God, they're like the same person, you know? But the biggest thing that I learned in writing the book was that, was just like how my brain works. I always thought that if you needed to write a book, you had to sit down and create an outline and figure out like every single thing. And yes, some people do that, but the way that I write is very all over the place. And I spend a lot of time writing in my head before I sit down, actually type it on paper, on Google Docs, whatever. Because
like Shonda Rhimes.
Like Shonda Rhimes. Exactly. Yeah, she has like a little ritual. And I also think like, because I had a newborn when I started writing, it forced me to have to step away from the desk. Because I think I know myself. So if I'm like, I'm going to write this book and I'm going to finish this book, I would have sat there for like 4 hours trying to brute force a chapter. But because I had to take these breaks very often to feed the baby, to change the diaper, to play with her, then I would write something. I didn't have the answer. I wanted to like figure something out. I would step away. And like I talk about in the book, a lot of times your brain will naturally create connections between two totally different subjects if you give it enough time to work in the background. So I'd be doing something and I'd be like, oh, wait, I see the link. And like, then it would come to me. And then I was excited to go back to the desk to write. So I think I learned that it's actually very much, first of all, writing a book is hard. If you don't love it and if you're only going to do it for marketing and promotional purposes, absolutely don't, because people who love writing find it hard. And so I think like I learned, make sure you take breaks from the material because you'll get new ideas and better ideas, and it'll come together. And I think like actually even Aaron Sorkin does this too. He takes walks, really long showers. So just give your mind an opportunity to work in the background while you're doing something else. Yeah, your nod to your daughter and the acknowledgments was really sweet. And it's really cool to be creating that as a new mom. It's, that's a real, this 4th trimester, right? Like is a real time of like growth and learning. And I know for my wife and myself, when we had our first specifically, it was just like so much new coming on. I cannot believe that you put pen to paper at all in that time. But it's so cool that was a helpful part of your process. It's really cool. Also, it's just something that like I did only for myself. Before the baby was born, one of my friends said, my only piece of advice is just at the end of the night, just take 15 minutes and do something only for yourself. So you don't go crazy. And what she kind of meant was like scroll through Instagram. But what to me, it was more like, do a creative project only for yourself, and writing is when I feel most myself.
Why this book? Why now?
Well, if it wasn't for an editor at a publishing house who reached out to me who said, "Hey, I really liked this profile dossier, this deep dive that I do with my newsletter that you did on Melanie Perkins. If your thoughts ever turn to writing a book, let us know." And I was like, why would my thoughts ever turn to writing a book? But then, like, I was just curious, and I asked about the process, and I got too involved. And then it was step by step by step, very small steps. And I think like this book is just a way for me personally but hopefully a lot of other people, to take all the learnings that I've had from all these different people that I've studied or interviewed into one comprehensive book that you can refer back to. So when I was 23 and had just moved to New York from Georgia, and I felt so lost. I was working at a startup that I didn't really like, and it was just like a whole thing. I kept feeling lost, and I was like, is there somebody who's had a similar path, like that turned it out okay? And I stumbled upon Sarah Blakely, who's also from Atlanta, and she created Spanx after failing at a bunch of other things. She wanted to be a lawyer. She wanted to be goofy at Disney World. She wanted to do all this stuff that didn't work out. And she's like, but think about it. If I had aced the LSAT, I would have never started Spanx. And it's like, her story really inspired me. And that was the first time I studied someone to take lessons from their life. So I wrote this book for then 23-year-old me, but hopefully a bunch of other people who are kind of feeling lost right now.
Polina, hey, thanks so much for hanging out today. I love this conversation. It is cool to see all the twists and turns, and just love the work that you're doing. Excited to see Hidden Genius be a great smashing success, and we'll continue to follow that journey. If people want to find you, where should they be looking?
You can find me anywhere. No, you can find me at readtheprofile.com, which is my newsletter, or hiddengeniusbook.com, which is the book.
Hey, thanks so much.
Thank you.